Hello again, everyone. We're about to get the next section of the conference underway. If you are one of our French delegates, I should explain the diplomatic reasoning behind the cream tea that you've enjoyed this afternoon and the controversy surrounding the cream tea. Who'd have thought a scone, jam, and clotted cream could be controversial, or scone, you might call it. Here we have an example of the controversy. Which way is the correct way, would you say, to serve? Our Devon producers have crossed out the correct way of doing it in favour of the Devon way of doing it. However, I should declare an interest here in that I was born and brought up in Cornwall, and so the correct way is jam first. But given we are in Devon for this conference, if you've chosen to have it the Devon way today, that's fine as well. Ultimately, it tastes the same. And the good thing is we were having Cornish clotted cream, which I believe is protected when we were part of the European Union as a designation. So there you are. I hope you enjoyed the cream tea, whichever way you decided to eat it. Let's get back to business now, and we've got another couple of great keynote speakers before we have another panel discussion where we will be answering some of the questions that you may have as a result of what we've heard this afternoon. Our next key speaker is Hannah Baker, who's a Programme Manager for Communities Prepared UK. And Hannah's going to give us an overview of this England-wide community resilience programme, which helps communities to better prepare for, respond to, and recover from a range of emergencies, including flooding. So very appropriate considering our discussions today. Would you please now welcome Hannah Baker.
Hi everyone, thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's been a really fascinating day, and I know sort of we're getting on towards the end of the day now, so I appreciate that it was great to see lots of faces still in the room. So yeah, thank you, and thanks for everyone who's still online as well. So yeah, I'm here to speak about our Communities Prepared programme. And yeah, this is me. I work for a charity called Groundwork, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Groundwork, it's a federation of trusts working across the UK, and we seek to mobilise communities around poverty and environmental action. And we work with a whole range of communities and on a whole range of projects, including some actually in the Plymouth area. I'm based in Bristol, and I'm the area programme manager for the West of England, as well as managing this Communities Prepared programme as well. We operate around three key themes, around encouraging people to live greener lifestyles, helping to improve people's prospects, and also helping to make better places. But we often find a lot of our projects kind of cross multiple themes, and I think Communities Prepared is one of them. So today I'm going to cover these key areas. So I'm going to introduce Communities Prepared to you all. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of our approach, set out where we've been working to date, and who with and how we've been operating. And also what we've been learning, really. And I think it's been great to hear from lots of other speakers today around kind of lessons learned from projects. And it's something that we all know we need to do and is really valuable as we come to the end, well, throughout projects, and also as we come to the end of projects like BRIC is doing now as well. So I'll talk a little bit about how we're applying what we've learned so far to our future plans too. So, yeah, who are we? So we're in a national, we say national, it is England-wide, community resilience programme, and we're funded by the National Lottery. It's their Reaching Communities England Fund, and that's why, to date, our work has been England-wide, but we're certainly looking to sort of expand and work in the devolved nations going forward if we can, funding dependent. We do have some funding from other sources as well. The lottery funding has enabled us to have a core team of staff and to grow that team over the past few years as well, and to offer our kind of core services to communities, and I'll come on to what that looks like, free of charge. So we're not charging any communities to receive our support, and that's been really important to us throughout. But our other funders that we have working alongside as well, we've had some funding from SSEN, so Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, which has given us some regionally focused work, including in Dorset and Wiltshire and Hampshire. And we've also had some funding from Aviva, which is a new project, which is a partnership with the British Red Cross that's just getting underway at the minute. So watch this space on that one. We work with a whole range of local partners, and that's really important to us. We know that we can't do this alone. The challenges that communities are facing and the problems we're trying to tackle are growing ever bigger, with climate change increasing the sort of severity and the frequency of flooding and other events. So, working with organisations like the Environment Agency, British Red Cross, as I've mentioned, local resilience forums, local authorities, and others, voluntary and community sector partners as well, is really important to us. And what we do is provide training and support to community volunteers. We've got a whole programme of training resources, which I'll talk a little bit about today. And our goal is really around kind of providing that sort of knowledge, skills and confidence around the preparation for events, the responding to those events and also recovering from them. And we talk about multiple events, multiple types of hazards, in our work, but I'll explain a little bit about the history of our programme and how we've got to that point. Alongside that, we have a whole range of sort of localised support that we provide. So we have a national offer and we have a localised offer as well, and it really depends on what the needs of different communities and different partner organisations are. And yeah, we have an online learning hub, which I will talk to you a little about today as well. So, our history. Sorry, I realise that white font's not particularly easy to see, but essentially the roots of Communities Prepared are very much in the southwest of England, stemming from one of the DEFRA Pathfinder projects that took place, looking around, at community resilience to flooding a number of years ago now. And some of our founding partners, so the Environment Agency, Cornwall Community Flood Forum, Cornwall College Business, were all have been involved, and are still engaged in our project to date. So it's really providing that kind of continuity and that opportunity to kind of learn from our experience as we go. But yeah, from 2016 to 2018, Communities Prepared started as a regional pilot, really, in the southwest of England. A lot of work in Devon and Cornwall with partners there, and also going into sort of Somerset as well. And towards the end of that, I think there was a realisation that actually what we were offering, this sort of opportunity to provide training and support to communities, there was huge potential for that to be transferred. Both in terms of a wider geographic reach, but also actually some of the skills we were talking about with communities around how they could support, how volunteers could support their wider community were applicable not just to flooding, which is where this project started, but to storms, potentially, to snow events, to utility failure, and obviously in the last few years as well to public health pandemics as well. So we actually found that we could broaden our scope without necessarily having to do sort of too much additional work to make that possible. So yeah, from 2018 onwards, again, all thanks to National Lottery funding, which we've been very fortunate to continue to receive, we've been working on a national programme England-wide and looking at multiple hazards as well. That's running through till next year, next May, and beyond that there is still certainly a bit of an unknown about where we go. And we certainly know that the need for what we're offering will continue, is growing and will continue to grow. And that we're seeing more of a momentum around this as well, with a narrative that's emerging from the UK government and with local resilience forums starting to appoint community resilience coordinators. And so we know there's a need, but in terms of what we can offer into that, we're kind of really doing a lot of work at the minute to sort of find our place and hopefully secure further funding to help us to continue to provide this support going forward. So as a programme, our main aims haven't really changed in that time. I was just talking about, there are still these sort of core aims that we're working towards. It's around helping communities to feel more confident in their ability to respond to and recover from these emergencies that they might be faced with. And for community volunteers to feel they can take some kind of lead, so to feel empowered as well. And to do that, we need to make sure that, for those that are not feeling that confident or not feeling that well informed, that we're providing with the right information and the right resources to do that. We encourage communities to develop plans and strategies that will enable them to be part of that response effort. So, looking at community flood plans or community emergency plans, and either helping communities to develop them from scratch, or where they've got them, to look at whether they're fit for purpose, encouraging them to review them, practice them, put them to the test. Will they really work? And also it's about those connections as well. We know that emergency responders will go into communities when there's a flood or other event, and we want there to be that sense of community volunteers coming in to help and not being a hindrance, but knowing that they know what they're doing, and they can be trusted to kind of be part of that response effort. So how do we do that? Well, as I've said, we work in partnership with other organisations. We also work with communities, and we really try to co-develop the approach that we're taking so that it actually meets the needs of the communities. So we've developed a national model, but we localise it and we tailor it to make it work for those local needs. In terms of what we do, we have a whole series of resources. You can see some of the cover images here, and we've got a table just outside the room. You can actually flick through some of our booklets if you're interested, just at the end of the day as well. And these are also all available on our website. Essentially, we have a whole series of courses that we offer, and they can just be accessed online or on our online learning hub. And they are now, as of last autumn, there are lots of online learning courses you can just go through in your own time without them being taught. But we also do offer a range of sort of taught courses and workshops and discussion opportunities. Most of that is online at the moment, certainly when we're looking at working nationally, but we do also run in-person events as well and courses. And there's sort of two sides to it in terms of what we cover. We have sort of hazard-specific and emergency response content, so it will look at things like floods, snow, etc. It will look at how emergency response works, who's responsible for what, and how volunteers can fit in with that. But alongside that, we also have more of a sort of community development focused approach. So we might support groups thinking about how they can get more volunteers on board, which is a constant challenge for most of the communities that we've been engaging with, or how they might be able to secure funding to carry on doing what they want to do, or to buy equipment that they might need, or how they can tell people about their work, so communications, marketing, that sort of thing. So we're thinking about that wider sustainability of groups as well as those specific skill sets. As I mentioned before as well, we are, alongside that core offer, we sort of have other sub-projects going on, and the one that Aviva is sponsoring and that we're working with them and are across to deliver is around looking at a new concept of community resilience hubs. So we're training as part of that, but really thinking about how we can bring networks of people together, different types of community stakeholders, both in a physical way with a physical space which might serve for training, it might serve as a coordination point in emergency, it might be an equipment store, but also a kind of almost virtual hub, that kind of network, that way of bringing people together so that they feel like they are part of a network. Watch this space on that one. It will be launched in the next few weeks. So yeah, if you follow us on social media, you'll find out more about that. So a little bit more about our online hub. As I mentioned, this has sort of grown in recent months, and in the autumn we launched a lot of new online resources. But essentially it's a platform that is free to join. We do ask people to become members. It basically means we kind of know what our reach is. It helps us obviously with our reporting to our funders, but also helps us know kind of who we're supporting and how we can more effectively support the people that we work with. We have the online resources on there, and we also have a whole range of other resources on there as well. We've got a space where you can sign up to a newsletter. We've got a members forum for people to kind of share their own challenges, and not just for us to be able to answer questions as professionals, but also for communities to help each other and answer each other's questions, which we often find we get a lot of really positive feedback on. And someone can say, well, we've had that experience in our community and this is how we dealt with it. In a way, that can be more helpful than us responding from our perspective, kind of from afar. On the website as well, we have guest blogs, we have opportunities for people to sign up to events and all that sort of stuff. So it's really worth a look at. And it was really interesting hearing earlier about some of the other kind of technology developments around looking at sort of community resilience, and I'm kind of keen to explore that a little bit further to see how we can hopefully learn from each other, learn from what's being done by other organisations as well. So some of the organisations that we work with, and this is just some of them, we've obviously got some of our funders on there. We've started to work with the Voluntary and Community Sector Emergencies Partnership, looking at how we can kind of work across that sector to make sure that what we think is needed around community resilience actually does meet the needs of the people we're looking to support. We're working with NALC, the National Association of Local Councils, and then we've got a good relationship with the Cabinet Office, who run a group called the Communities Prepared National Group. By chance the same name, no real connection there, but we're part of the group, and it's a good opportunity to engage with local resilience forums across the country. And I put our own Groundwork logo on there too, and that's because whilst officially Communities Prepared is housed in Groundwork South, in the south of England, it is a national programme, and the federated structure of the organisation means there's a real opportunity for us to link in with Groundwork trusts all around the country to meet those different local needs. And with a small team that we are, we can't meet every request for support that's out there. So if we can kind of have more of a regional offer where we can turn to other trusts and say, can you help us to, respond to these requests for support from communities, then that's a way of us operating more efficiently as well. So I'm hoping we can play a brief film now. We created this film a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, and it just shows a community group in Chew Magna in Somerset who were engaged early on in the programme, but it's actually quite a nice way of demonstrating the impact that the programme has had, and also how that group of historically flood wardens has diversified to think about other kind of hazards they might need to address, and what they need to do to make that possible. So if the technology is working, hopefully we'll be able to play that now.
We're the Chew Magna flood wardens. There are 19 of us, and we work with the community to prepare against flood events and other emergencies.
The training we had from Communities Prepared was very helpful in terms of making us aware of the situations that we face.
We'd already written the flood plan, we'd had some water safety training from the fire service, and what impressed me is their ability to link in and to know what we needed as a group, so to be able to build on that rather than just coming in and doing a off-the-shelf kind of training session.
To me, community resilience is all about working together as a team to try and make sure everybody's safe and secure as best as they can be.
So I think it's made two sets of differences to myself. And one is the addition of specific skills that we learned in that time, but the other difference the training made was almost a change in mindset to try to anticipate things that were happening.
Not just to have people dashing out in their wellies when the floods came, but to prepare for the floods and to try and prevent the floods happening.
There are lots of benefits to be had from being involved in these local groups, whether they're to do with flooding or other forms of resilience.
The way I would describe the village is that it's under constant threat of flood. Every year, maybe 3 or 4 major threats arise.
Too many flood incidents to count, really. And my house flooded in 2012, which is why I volunteered as a flood warden.
It's very scary for people because the rivers around here rise very fast. Training is very good because now I've actually become a flood warden because it's a lot safer and it's interesting as well.
Now we've got the sets of modules. When we have new wardens come on board, we use the modules with them and do sort of top-up training, and we've built on it over the years to do first aid training. We've extended our flood plans into more of an emergency plan.
My message for any community that's looking to become involved in resilience is that if you help yourself, you'll get a lot of people helping you do that.
I would suggest they get in touch with Communities Prepared, because I think what is so great about them is that they are able to tailor things to your needs, and all they need to do is get in touch with communitiesprepared.org.uk.
So obviously a bit of a plug for our programme at the end there, but yeah, it's a good way of just sort of demonstrating just the impact that the programme's had on just one community and what they've been able to do. So yeah, just wanted to share that one with you there. Don't need to watch it again. So yeah, in terms of our work to date, as I mentioned, we've got this sort of national work that we've been doing, but as you can see on this list here, we've worked in quite a few different regions around the country. During the pandemic, obviously, we had to shift what we were doing quite a lot. So we started before the pandemic, as I mentioned, 2018 was when we started our sort of national rollout of the programme. And it was very much intended to be a sort of in-person training and sort of support offer. So we would go to communities, we'd sit together, we'd run these training sessions, we'd help develop emergency plans, go out in the community and test them with them. But obviously we had to shift that early in 2020. And what it meant is we could offer quite a lot of online sessions, so Zoom very much became our friend. And we did a lot of that at a regional level, which had a huge advantage of being able to reach more people. So some of the sessions that we ran, you know, we'd have upwards of 60 people coming along to a session during the pandemic. And that was great being able to reach more people, but it did mean we couldn't do as much in-depth engagement as we'd intended to do. So it's got pros and cons. Yeah, as you'll see, we have actually managed to reach quite a few different areas of England. And that's continuing. Those relationships are continuing to build. And in many cases, we'll find that we'll do a series of training for an area for 1 year, and the next year they come back and say, could you repeat that? We've got lots of new volunteers that have come on board, or actually the volunteers thought it was great, and could we add to that by looking at some other content? So yeah, as I sort of said here in terms of how we do it, we've got these sort of regional webinars that are led by ourselves in partnership with others. We've also run workshops as part of other events. So, for example, in Yorkshire, we've worked closely with the Environment Agency. They've run their own community flood warden events, and we've come along and delivered a session as part of that. Presenting at conferences like this one and attending sort of industry events like the Flood Expo and others have provided us with opportunities to share information on what we're doing, build relationships as well, of course. And then that sort of tailored support offer that we provide to communities as well is very much part of what we know we can do, although we haven't found there's been as much appetite for that as we've expected. So our work has been more regional and national focus really to date. Some numbers, we all like numbers. So since the national programme started, we've worked with over 750 individuals. And yeah, as you can see here, that's sort of over 100 different training sessions or workshops that we've been able to deliver. As I said, mostly online over the last few years, but there has been some in-person work too. And that's to over 200 different communities. And our online hub membership is continuing to grow, which is brilliant. And what we're doing at the moment is looking at how we can not just get the members, but get them to be more engaged as well. We can see the numbers going up, but actually in terms of kind of interaction with the site, once you've signed up as a member, we're looking at how we can support and encourage members to use the site more. And we've had some great feedback as part of our evaluation, and we're fortunate that with our lottery funding we were able to appoint an independent evaluator, so we can get someone to actually, you know, really look in depth at what the programme's achieving and what we can learn from that. So you can just see some of the numbers here in terms of the feedback that we've been getting so far. We're undergoing at the moment a review of all these numbers as we have a report due to our funder in May. So these numbers will sort of shift, and we'll be sharing information on that on our website soon as well. Just some pictures and quotes from some of our recent events. I think this one was in Milton Keynes last year, and then this is at the Flood Expo, where I mentioned we've spoken there before. This was back in 2019, actually, at Somerset Prepared, so one of the events that we didn't organise but had an opportunity to run workshops at. And we did a whole community emergency plan workshop based around the Archers. For those of you in England, you'll know what that is, a popular radio show. We had to have a fictional community so that we weren't shown to be focusing on any one actual community in Somerset, so it worked quite well with the audience. Another workshop that took place last year, and a couple of quotes there around feedback from some of the participants that we've worked with. So yeah, on to some learnings before I wrap up. So we know, as I said earlier, we know there's a huge need and a huge demand for community-focused sort of support around resilience. And we know that need will continue to increase, and you know, it already has changed quite a lot from when we started out with this programme. But I think what's shifting as well is that momentum. The language that the UK government has been using around the whole of society resilience, which for those of you who are familiar with it, you'll have seen is quite central in the UK National Resilience Framework that was published in December. You know, that language is there. There's a lot of really good narrative in that framework around you know, the government's plans to support and grow whole of society resilience over the next few years. But there's still a question mark really around how that's done. So we're kind of looking forward to being part of that, working out how that framework can be implemented. But while the demand is there and the momentum is there, we're noticing that people are getting really busy again. Post-COVID, you know, everyone's able to get on with their lives again, and we're certainly seeing that numbers coming along to our sort of training sessions aren't as high as they were. There's a lot of competing priorities. Partly active volunteers are likely, in many cases, to volunteer for a lot of different things, and so they're busy. And in other cases, there are communities where there are a lot of people who just wouldn't have the time or the capacity to even volunteer as in their community. Their priorities are going to be about heating their homes and feeding their families, and you know, they might be at high risk of flooding or another emergency, but they might just not be able to kind of give their time in that way. So we know we've got that kind of challenge that we're facing. And we know it can take a while to do this. I mean, as was being discussed earlier, 2 years for a programme isn't very long. We've been running longer than that. We've still got a huge amount of work to do. And we'll start to have conversations with a local potential partner, and 6 months later, they'll still be happening and nothing will have actually been delivered. So it does take time. And we're only a small team, and there's only so much we can do. So we know, you know, taking all those learnings on board, we know we need to work in partnership. And we do that already, but we can continue to do more of that. And that's at different levels, nationally, regionally and locally. We know we need to prioritise our focus. And I think a really key thing for us is thinking about, we can't do everything. So what topics do we focus on? What regions do we focus on? And there's lots of really brilliant other initiatives out there. You know, we had someone from the National Flood Forum talking earlier, their focus specifically on flooding. There's lots of brilliant work that they're already doing across the country around that. So there's no point in us going into a community where that sort of project's already ongoing. There's great local authority-led examples as well, programmes in North Yorkshire, for example, and others that, you know, where those kind of programmes exist, there may not be a need for us to, you know, wave our offer around and say, hey, come to us. We're really wanting to kind of fill gaps and complement other efforts rather than duplicate them. We know we need to make sure our work is relevant and useful to the communities and partners we work with, and that's why that co-development angle is really, really key. And we know we need to be flexible and responsive, and we need to adapt our programme as we learn. So, like I said before, having an evaluator to help us do that is really, really helpful to make sure that we're placing our programme right. And yeah, for us, what's next? So we are further developing our online hub. We've just secured some funding which will help us to do that. And we're looking at how we can use it as a volunteer management tool so that community coordinators can go on, they can have a really good record of what training their volunteers have had and when, thinking about when that training might need to be refreshed as well, and having a better understanding of the volunteers' capabilities. So has someone done some first aid training at some point, or does someone have a communications background and therefore could help with the social media, etc. So we're sort of seeing how we could facilitate that kind of capability on our website. We'll be targeting our support, as I mentioned before. We're also thinking about the governance of our programme and strategic planning, making sure that we're getting some external inputs to help us shape our programme going forward, especially thinking about our funding future as well. Of course, we'll continue to raise our profile, and we're working as a team to really think about what our future is going to look like. So, last couple of slides. So, in terms of how if you're interested in being part of this, and I recognise there are lots of people who are listening who are in France, and you know, you're welcome to look at our resources, but we're not, unfortunately, able to offer support in the same way that we can in England. But yeah, please do, if you take a look around our online hub and want to sign up as a member, feel free to do that. You can have a look at our online resources, and if you're interested in coming along to one of our upcoming workshops, you can sign up through our website. You can sign up to our newsletter, which comes out monthly. And we're really happy to talk about opportunities to work together. We've already had some conversations with the colleagues here from Plymouth City Council. We've been talking to Dan in Weymouth before, and we've done some training as part of, linked into the BRIC project. And yeah, we're really happy to talk about how we might be able to work together. And if you're here with a kind of community hat on, or even if you're here professionally but are concerned about your own community's resilience, then yeah, happy to have a chat about how we might be able to work together on this as well. So yeah, that's it from me. I just put the sort of key contact details there, but do come and have a chat with me or my colleague Emily. We'll be sort of outside at the end of the session today, and I know there's a panel discussion, so yeah, any questions, happy to take at that point as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for a keynote speech which gets to the heart of what today is all about in helping communities to build their resilience. One thing that has often struck me in the years during my time as a broadcaster and journalist being sent to flood-hit communities is the first challenge was often actually physically getting to those communities after the flooding event. Often the roads were blocked or they'd been washed away completely. So the first emergency response is often from the communities themselves. So any tools, any training, any help that they can be provided with before an event happens means that they are better prepared to be the first responders when an emergency strikes. So what Hannah was saying really gets to the heart of that. And as Hannah said, there will be an opportunity, if there are any questions you have for Hannah and the work of Communities Prepared, there'll be an opportunity to put those questions in a few minutes' time. So that's a UK perspective which we heard there. Let's hear now a French perspective on building resilience, because we're going to go across to France again now. So you may want to avail yourself of our wonderful translation services. Our translators have done a tremendous job today. So if you're requiring the services of the translators, you might require your headphones in a moment. Our next keynote speaker is a risk management expert and also Director General of AFPCNT. It's Ghislaine Verrheist-Leblanc, who's going to talk to us about why, in particular, the 13th of October has become a key day. It's known as National Resilience Day, and it's helping communities, as we've been discussing already today, work out best ways to be resilient to natural and technological risks, and some of the projects that they've been involved in to ensure that all stakeholders and general members of the population are getting involved. So would you please welcome now Ghislaine Verrheist-Leblanc.
Bonjour à tous. J'espère que vous m'entendez.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. So, thank you for welcoming me to your conference. Thanks to all the organizers, including Cerema, who invited me. So my presentation will be about citizen involvement. I will give you several examples with specifically with floods, and then we'll widen the perspective. To begin with, the AFPCNT, it's association focused on the prevention, natural and technological risk. It's a nationwide association that works both on natural and technological risk, and that works on the network of risk prevention in the world. We have about 150 members, including some associations, but also public associations. And Cerema is one of these associations. This association took a new dynamic, and last year in 2022, in 2021, after several events, including in southern France in 2015, in 2018, in Aude, and in 2022, Alex, this tropical storm. Then there was an industrial accident, Lubrizol. All these events led us to carry out an expertise exercise on the level of risk culture in France. The Minister of the Ecology launched an expertise mission that was led by a journalist called Fred Courant, and he showed that the level of culture of risk in France was, well, left to be desired. So he suggested several improvements with the group of 6 experts, and the Ministry of the Environment launched of the Education launched a program called Let's All Be Resilient Faced to Risk.
Désigner une structure nationale existante.
The idea was to designate an existing structure or to create a new structure in order to improve the culture of risk around culture of prevention phase 2 risk and major risk, technological and natural risk.
D'un projet associatif qui s'appelle Scarabée et qui vise notamment à contribuer à faire de la journée du 13 octobre, Journée internationale des risques, un moment fédérateur de l'ensemble des citoyens, collectivités et autres acteurs français au niveau de la prévention des risques majeurs.
Our association created this structure called Scarabée in order to do this and to help prevent major risk through community efforts.
Il s'agit notamment également de développer la résilience, de s'inspirer de ce qui peut se faire sur des territoires ultramarins, les territoires d'outre-mer qui sont fortement exposés.
It's about developing resilience, following the inspiration of work done in overseas territories that were particularly affected, and to monitor action by local actors. And this echoes what was said in the previous presentation about prevention exercises and to build on national and international experience and this experience to improve our action. For risk culture, there are several possible approaches. There's memory of previous experiences. There's preventative action. Young people are a particular target for these actions to make them more resilient when they become adults. And so we have demonstrators to simulate the situations, for example, in an underground parking lot or when driving. And we also try to mobilize artists to raise awareness so that each citizen is aware that they must be the owner of their own security. I hope you still can hear me. So about the International Natural and Technological Catastrophe Day. It was created in 1999. It's the second Wednesday in October each year. And it has become an international natural and technological catastrophe prevention day in 2019. In France, the government decided to make it the National Resilience Day in 2022. So we hope that this day will gain in popularity. So the actors mobilized are, of course, first and foremost citizens, but also stakeholders, local authorities, associations, including the UNDRM, the United Nations Office, and other key actors. through this day, so the first Resilience Day in 22, many actions were carried out at national levels and they received a label through the government. And through this day, we tried to demonstrate that citizens were at the heart of territorial resilience. And citizens shouldn't wait for orders or injunctions from local authorities. However, very simple, concrete actions they could take could have a tremendous impact at community level. At French level, with our actors and the members I mentioned a while ago, we put forth 64 proposals to increase the notoriety of this day by mobilizing at national level through exercises, simulations, games, conferences, public debates, and other kinds of events at local level to develop risk culture. From our association's point of view, we carried out 50 events. You can see here one event that was carried out that was an interdepartmental action with social security and local authorities, and there was an open door day to create situations and simulations for citizens to help them measure how difficult it is to extinguish a fire. There's vibrating tables that demonstrated how floods reached different places, and also to also understand what prevented citizens to really act and engage with us and associations like us, and also public authorities. We have and will continue to build on testimonies from players here. It's mayors this year we will focus on citizens that were affected by floods or that are particularly active in their neighborhood to very concretely act. So capitalizing on an experience, this effort will be continued this year. So there's the artistic perspective to convey an overall idea, an overall vision of this subject, also to reach people who are not necessarily interested and necessarily aware of the issue. So we worked with artists to also shed a positive light on this implication. We also launched an international art competition, mobilizing different forms of art: singing, poetry, novel writing, comic writing, drawing. So we had 7,000 entries, and we're going to try to promote this kind of citizen involvement. Theater was also used. With a director, we developed a play that's addressed to school children and high school children and adults in order to really raise awareness to the future risks, the future, also the catastrophic events that will unfortunately be more and more frequent with global warming. And there were simulations that we did. We used VR, RV, virtual reality, that is very effective with young people. Here you have a scenario of wildfires and earthquakes too, and this really shows how relevant it is to have the right, take the right actions faced to these situations. And there are vulnerable people. That was one of the focuses of BRIC. We tried to work with vulnerable people, including the elderly. You may remember about the events that affected La Faute-sur-Mer in Vendée a few years ago. We worked with elderly people to see how we could do a better job taking into account their needs, their expectations, their weaknesses, and also their strengths, the strength of these populations who live in exposed areas. In 22, we wanted to know if this international day, there are international days for other issues, such as March 8th for women, the journey of the day of Heritage Day, and so on. So we wanted to make sure that this day about risk culture could have the same impact. So we launched a survey with a survey agency, IFOP, to measure the interest for this day. And we were surprised to see that at least 1 out of 5 people in France knew about this day and find that it is useful. 70% find that it's relevant and useful, and their expectations is to better understand risks in order to anticipate and take preventative action in their workplace, in their homes, and the places they frequently go to. So another surprise is that places that are regularly impacted have a level of perception of the relevance of this day much higher, as you say. As you see, 8 out of 10 population are really expecting to receive information on the possible impacts for them, and 3 out of 5 people find that this day is useful. So we tried to build on these initial signals from, for example, the simulation workshops. We surveyed about 1,000 parents, children, and teachers that could have heard their children in order to measure if these territorial workshops were effective. So unambiguously, it appears that physical simulation are extremely effective. So 3 and 4 years down the line, we realized that the right behaviors are really understood much better than children that were not exposed to these workshops. We also, another surprise is contrary to what we might think, and that we know from other subjects, we thought that children were very good vectors, like for example for tobacco and things like that. We realized that they like for the following up these things would trigger new discussions, but it may have to do with change in the way people act around the table. For example, where people use their families are individually focused on their smartphones and no longer discuss so much, so it doesn't work that well. And also through our Scarabée project, we wanted to measure in the French population, this is initial results because it hasn't been released yet, we surveyed 10,000 people in the metropolitan France and in overseas territories to measure their perception of risk, but also the hindrances and drivers to their own involvement. So whether people are involved in community committees and so on to act to resilience. So a few figures. When we look at people in France who are really, really exposed, we know that they're exposed to major risks. Only 34% of them are really aware of this exposure, with slightly higher figures in overseas territories, but sometimes very, very low, and worryingly so in some other territories that are exposed. When French citizens are asked whether they have implemented measures, if they are in the 34% people who are exposed, if they have implemented concrete preventative actions, only 12% in metropolitan France have. In overseas territories, it's 33%. Organizational or actions to better prepare for a specific event. When asked about why they do or do not take preventative action, so majority of people say that knowledge, access to digestible information would be helpful to help them take action. And there are 44% who mention financial aid. It's an important trigger or an important factor. And there is sharing experience, knowing that some other citizens share advice, maybe having sheets with practical information, and also being supported by associations. That would be a major factor to help them. Sometimes people want to take action, but they do not know exactly and specifically what they should do. On the other hand, when they are asked what are the hindrances, most of them mention lack of information, what risks we're exposed to and what should be done. And they believe that information provided by government authorities and local authorities is insufficient. As to best practices, in France, we have a body of law and a technical framework that is quite ancient. There's a new campaign about cleaning up thistle and prevention of wildfires. But despite all of the tools and the long history of communication on best practices, 70% of people in France say they do not know how to behave when faced to a major event, which is quite an alarming figure considering the investment done. And so this might mean that we need to change approaches if we want to be more effective. On local engagement, when French citizens are asked, are you yourself involved? Have you taken action at local level, at municipal level to work to the benefit of the community? So only 6%, slightly more in overseas territories, answer yes, that they do work at community level for risk prevention. That is extremely low. This is hardly surprising. We expected to find a low level, but this should be a signal to us to really change our approach. Maybe we should recognize to organize competition and to really publicize the richness and the importance of citizen involvement. When asked why they are not more involved in improving their territory's resilience, most people answer lack of time. Of course, time is a rare commodity. another reason is lack of knowledge, general knowledge and technical knowledge as to what concrete action to take. So to us, this survey that also includes much more information should be a basis to carry out new action and in order to reach much better figures in the next survey that will be carried out in 2 years to see if all the action we have been taking will actually improve citizen involvement in improving territory resilience. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Ghislaine. And Ghislaine is going to rejoin us in just a moment, along with Samuel, who was with us earlier from France as part of our panel to answer your questions now. I'd like to invite back onto the stage our keynote speakers from this session. So Dusty, if you wouldn't mind joining us, and Hannah as well. And Lisa Oxford is also going to join us from the BRIC project here in Plymouth to answer any of the questions you may have from earlier today, as well as a sort of overview of BRIC, any questions you have regarding BRIC itself. So any questions, same as this morning's session, we've got 2 microphones in the room. So if you're here in the Crowne Plaza Hotel in Plymouth, just put your hand up and I'll make sure a microphone gets to you so that we can hear you. If you're joining us online, if you want to submit a question via the chat box, and those questions will be then passed on to me. And as I say, Ghislaine and Samuel are also joining us online. They'll be with us shortly as well to answer any questions you may have for them. Some thought-provoking conversations we've had in this session, some really interesting points that Dusty raised in terms of adapting buildings in city centre areas, particularly urban environments, in building green walls and green roofs, and how that might play a part in making our communities a bit more resilient to flooding. Some really interesting research from Samuel, and indeed from Ghislaine, similar research, I thought, from both of them, showing people's attitudes to risk and how people perhaps are not as prepared as they could be. And for the various reasons that we heard outlined by Samuel, in many cases it's socio-economic situations that prevent people from being fully engaged in the flood risks that they might face. It might be age, it might be other vulnerabilities such as disability that prevents them from getting actively involved in finding out more about flood risk and flood resilience and how they respond when there is a flood or another natural disaster. So some really interesting points raised there. And Hannah's keynote speech I thought was fascinating as well, to hear how we can help those communities that maybe are not quite as prepared as they could be to help themselves, to be in a better and stronger position should they face a threat from an emergency. So a chance now to put questions to our panel. If you have a question, as I say, put your hand up and we will address your question to the most appropriate person on the panel. And there's a question here just in the middle. A microphone is on its way to you. Any second now. There we go. Oh, no, we can't hear you. It might not be switched on. I think it is now. Try it now.
Thank you. I'm Ruth Wilcox and I'm representing the Environment Agency today from Devon and Cornwall and Isles of Scilly. And I'd like to say thank you all very much from France and from England. It's been an amazing day. And thanks to Lisa for organising. I've got a question for Dusty. We're kind of focused on resilience and flood resilience, but we here in the southwest, we're currently in a kind of in and out of a drought period, and climate change isn't going to make that any better. We understand it's just we might expect a bit more of that. So I'm just wondering, are there any landscape or garden solutions, rooftop gardens or vertical gardens or anything that might help nature and wildlife survive and thrive in a drought situation?
Yeah, I can help you. I'm mainly at roof level, so my roofs don't get irrigated, so they tend to actually die in a drought. What's remarkable, though, is they come back normally, but actually to take it to the ground level, and there's a few people here I know my friend John Little. He does a lot of work using aggregates, and I have a photograph of the 19th of July on Blackheath, and it's yellow. And I go to his garden in Essex, which is actually drier than where I am. And he uses all this ceramic waste, and his ceramic waste is all green. And it's very controversial because actually grass takes up a lot of water. And if you use a lot of nutrients, you get a lot of grass. And that actually is a big fire risk. So it's ironic, by actually using some of these aggregates at ground level, we can actually allow our wildflowers and our vegetation to survive the drought. But it's controversial because we have a cultural idea that grass is good.
Dusty, a point that I observed when we were listening to your presentation earlier on is, and everyone's thinking about cost these days, when you're creating either a public building or even a private space and you want a green roof, you want to be as environmentally friendly as possible and make sure that your roof is absorbing water or whatever, how does the cost of that compare to traditional building methods?
Well, the way Manchester's just done some cost-benefit analysis on this, but it doesn't work with the way we do cost-benefit analysis at the moment. Because we don't do environmental cost-benefit analysis. We do, what's the cost of that material against that material. Yeah. Over a 25-year period, in terms of what's happening over the last 10 years, in terms of climate change and climate resilience, the stuff that I do should pay itself back. And I don't want to dwell too much, but I've mentioned to a few people, obviously I'm in the city and I go and see some very, very high-end clients. In the financial sector, the pension funds have been hit this year with something called the TFND. They're all talking about how they deal with nature. So I think things are going to change even from the financial sector, that some of these things become important, and as long as they can be paid for, they want to do them. But that's over the next 5 years.
So the challenge will be to change people's mindset, that it might be more expensive initially, but the benefits long term will pay for themselves because of the potential damage from flooding and other things. How do you change that mindset that this is an investment worth making for the longer term?
Well, I don't do a lot of stuff at ground level, but I have done some SUDs. But if we went to Syria, which is, people in England will know what Syria is they've led on the SUDs for years, the capital cost of a concrete pipe is a lot more expensive than a rain garden. But the revenue cost, so it's changing the culture from capital to revenue, and anybody who's involved in anything to do with plants and soil is everybody always worries about the revenue, not the capital. And we need to start doing something called stewardship rather than maintenance.
Good point. Thank you very much, Dusty. Yes, you wanted to come back with a question, yes?
It's a more general question for the individual panel members and contributors. I just wondered what's the most surprising thing that they've learned from working with communities?
Okay, well, let's go around and talk to all of our panellists. Maybe, Samuel, could we start with you, first of all? From your research, what's been the most surprising thing you've discovered talking to communities or hearing from communities?
Merci pour,
Thank you very much for this question. It's principally the gap between expectations from civil protection and local authorities and local populations, as if they lived on different planets. On the one side, you have local authorities and civil protection. They say if only we had Japanese citizens, there would be no more catastrophes because everything would work the way we want it to. On the other side, the local population says what they're interested in is the end of the month and not the end of the world. So this difficulty to have these two different groups to communicate and to align the interests of these different groups, and that was an extremely major surprise for me.
Ghislaine, may we ask you the same question from your involvement in this project and your ongoing work? What has been the most surprising discovery, would you say?
I agree with Samuel, what he's just said. There are 3 points. This link between children and parents, which was degraded. We see that citizens are losing knowledge of their own environment. And we really have to rediscover a global vision and to get interested once again, encourage and force people, if you like, to become interested in their own environment. Even on their own homes, people don't know the characteristics, favourable or unfavourable, of their own environment. And when we get to the level of certain presence of local education authorities, notably, or other state services, we're legitimate with regard to the initiatives we run, but we're no longer credible. And the COVID crisis has done a lot of damage, and it's necessary to mobilize citizens in order to get messages out to citizens. We have to do outreach to local mayors, and we have to modernize, we have to diversify, and we have to regain trust. And another very important point is that listening to local stakeholders and local initiatives have us evolve and develop the level of performance. There's a capacity for creation and invention in our local communities. And if we're interested in the way that people used to do things, and to listen to the populations who don't have much, I'm thinking of certain local populations who are vulnerable in our overseas territories, they have very effective strategies. And sometimes perhaps we want to see, in terms of technology and cost, things that we try and see things too big, and we need to look at smaller ways of doing things, and we need to have local appropriation, and so working with local populations hand in hand, and that's essential, and we need to do that across our national territories.
Or that a lot of people will appreciate and confirm what you have just said in terms of their own experiences. Let's check with our delegates here in the room. Hannah, first of all, in your ongoing work, what's been the most sort of surprising thing you've discovered from dealing with members of the public?
I mean, I think for us, it probably is something that I touched on in my presentation, was just around that kind of the amount of time that it can take around community engagement. I think we started off with community spread thinking, well, hang on, we're offering something that's free. There's going to be a huge demand for it. There's going to be, we know there's a need. But actually, it's that recognition of the fact that, like I was saying before, you know, people in communities are busy. They've got other priorities. There's a lot going on. And also that, you know, even with local authority or other partners who've got an appetite and want to get involved, they've got a lot of other things going on, decision-making processes that they have to go through. So that kind of, realisation, I guess, for us that, you know, even with a free offer that we know there's a need for, it doesn't mean it's just going to be able to happen like that, and you've got to allow that time.
Dusty, what about you in terms of engagement with communities? What's been the issue that's most surprised you, perhaps?
Well, I'm not really active now at that level, but what I've noticed, certainly in my area of Lewisham, is some of the most, and talking to people who do this, is some of the most important ways is where, and I think it's the, I'm only celebrating Canvey because I know Canvey Island, and I know exactly the difficulties that you said there, but the words there is having empathy with the people you're talking to. And what I've noticed on a lot of the council estates in Lewisham is a lot of the people on the council estates in Lewisham want to have wildflowers. And it's how we empower people to own the process. My experience, certainly, as a citizen representing nature in Lewisham, is it was always experts telling them what they should have. And so I've noticed that in all the talks today, there's been a lot of listening to the communities. The other thing I have to say, because I've not been involved, to do that in 2 years while COVID was going on, I am pretty impressed with that, to be quite frank, all of you. But I think the gentleman who was at Canvey said, we've got to go in and listen to them and reframe how we talk to them. I think you said we had to go away and rethink how we talk to them.
And that echoes what Ghislaine was saying a moment ago about re-engaging people, reigniting people's interest in in the risks that their communities face. Lisa, in terms of your involvement with BRIC here in Plymouth, you've been out a lot with your team, talking to people in the city and the surrounding area. What surprised you most about some of the reaction you got?
I think the biggest thing is actually that when you give the community an opportunity to talk, they take it. And they want to be heard. They don't understand everything. One size doesn't fit all. So we have to try lots and lots of different ways to engage. You know, we've gone out and we've talked to people on the street. That's been great. We've popped up in parks with our gazebo and just invited people to come and talk to us. We've had great engagement, great conversation when we've done that. We used a newsletter to try and reach wider audiences, because how do you reach those that won't come out to you? You know, do we have to knock on every single door, which is not practical? So there's the time element, there's the human resource element. But I agree with what everyone said. You know, communities want to be listened to. They want to be heard. But, you know, as Chris said, it's about us changing what we do. It's us changing our perception as well. So yeah, loads of surprises, but they want to be heard. They want to talk. They really do. And I think the other thing is also to go out there, not to just talk about flooding. I think we will all agree that when we open the conversation up and allow them to just talk, that then results in a better outcome at the end, and we do get to flooding at the end. It's just sometimes they just want to talk.
That's really interesting. A useful takeaway from this event today is perhaps not to go into communities and lecture on flooding, but engage them in general conversation and then bring it round to risk and flooding in particular eventually. Great stuff. Any other questions here in the room? Yes, Chris, I think microphone just on its way to you, if you wouldn't mind hanging on a second. Chris from Thames 21, who spoke earlier today.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, really interesting, particularly to hear from Samuel and Ghislaine. One of the things we have learnt is that we are very poorly skilled in the environmental sector at social science. And a lot of what seems to be, you know, our learning is social science. So I'm just really interested, I mean, either Samuel or Ghislaine, I'm not sure who best, but how do you think we can integrate social science research techniques into the environmental sector, so we're not just measuring the trees we plant or the impact on the environment, we're also able to evaluate our impact on people?
Samuel, could I put that to you first of all, and then maybe we'll see if Ghislaine's got anything to add. But Samuel, would you like to respond first of all?
Thank you. This is something that we already do with surveys early in projects, and then other surveys. And this is one of the methods that social science have deployed for many years in order to measure the effect of different projects, even on public policies or local initiatives on communities. Sometimes we use focus groups in projects, but what's important is to have an initial report, a statement of affairs before the project starts, in order to be able to make a comparison of before and after. Ghislaine? Yes, I agree with Samuel on what he was saying. If we situate ourselves on the side of those who are trying to implement, or we know the civil society groups or public institutions, we need a real multidisciplinary work, which is not sufficiently well developed. We've made a lot of progress in research projects and operational projects involving economists, psychologists and sociologists. There's another speaker who was mentioning these earlier, considering a global vision, an integrated vision of things. We can work on risk prevention, but that's not the #1 priority of our fellow citizens. if a measure can be beneficial for comfort on the economy, or if it can open to pluridisciplinarity and to have an integrated vision of what we can do. Samuel was talking about impact studies. That's important. Also, we shouldn't want to stick standards onto things everywhere. You know, here we've seen a miracle. We tried to implement it everywhere. We have to look at the history, local culture. Sometimes culture can be very local, and we have to take that into account before we work on prevention and reduction of risk. And so we need to work with historians and sociologists, anthropologists, and so forth. So we need to open things up in order to ensure that the soft sciences, which used to be perceived as less noble, and then harder and more structural sciences, when we talk about the vulnerability reduction. So working with humility and modesty, we are, we can be experts on perhaps on themes, but we have a lot to learn. And we have to become aware, open our chakras in order to better understand our fellow citizens, and that's very important.
Interesting answer again. Thank you, Ghislaine. Thank you, Samuel. Anyone else got a question here? Yes, there's one in the middle. Microphone just being passed across to you. Yeah.
We're just taking over on this table.
That's all right.
It's just struck me, listening now and looking around the room, I'd just like to ask everybody, how do we get flood resilience a bit more exciting for the TikTok generation? Because, you know, some of us are a certain age here, and nobody today has shown me anything that would capture my teenagers. So what would you do to do that?
That is, again, a really good question, because we've heard all sorts of ideas today about festivals and music events and entertainment, and we've seen lots of projects where children have been involved. But of course, children, particularly teenagers, are primarily engaged with life through their smartphones. So how do we approach those groups? Maybe we come back to Ghislaine again on this one first of all, and then we'll ask some of the panel here. The question you probably heard, Ghislaine, is how do we engage the TikTok generation?
That's very interesting as a question. Over and above teenagers, I believe that the person who asked this question said, how do we make this exciting? So how can we make our subjects, which they're kind of tragic, they're a bit dramatic, they're scary, they're not something you really want to get stuck into. We don't want to look at these closely. You know, we prefer having blinkers on or stick our heads in the sand when we face a problem. That's our widespread behavior. So how do we do positive communication, and how do we get people involved in these subjects? How does the way that we present things allow people to feel that they should get involved? You know, we talk about having to reduce consequences, but we have to talk about the consequences to avoid the gains, multi-theme gains that we can make. This has been evoked as well. That's interesting. And with regard to teenagers and TikTok generation, I think we have to mobilize teenagers to speak to other teenagers. You know, there are YouTubers. There are young ambassadors, teenage ambassadors, who can mobilize their own communities. They have millions of fans or followers, and and we should get them involved. And we shouldn't just have this fatalist vision with regard to new publications from the IPCC. You know, we're completely frozen, rigid. So it's the end of the world. And if we communicate in that way, people say, okay, everything's screwed up, so who cares? Nothing we can do about it. And so, so what's the point? And so we have to do this positive communication to teenagers. We've talked about difficult areas in Marseille, for example. Have taggers, you've got graffiti artists. We speak with them, rappers, and try and develop other routes to the attention of young people. Local radios, guided visits, young people's workshops. And you need to give them a sense of their own value. Young people want to get involved, and they want to feel that not everything's not lost. And so it's positive communication. It's going to be a bit sexier, a bit more motivating, rather than this kind of rather unwieldy, a bit drab, communication by experts. I agree, and because of my involvement in universities, I think it's important to involve people, to ask their opinion, and they have good solutions to offer. But I don't think this is a generation which is that different. They're interested in questions of inequality and questions of quality of life. And this is part of, this links in with the previous discussion. If we talk about the quality of life, the reduction of inequalities and injustice, we will interest them, and there we can ask them to contribute their solutions, and we can onboard young people through these conversations, irrespective of the channel used. We don't necessarily need to go and get musicians or video artists. It's a question of just opening the door to them.
Lisa, here in the UK, as I said earlier, you've been out engaging with communities. How much of a challenge was it to make the issue of flood risk exciting for teenagers to be engaged with? We saw lots of children involved and young people involved in your project, but how much of a challenge was it to get them involved and interested?
Extremely challenging. I think the younger children, it is much easier. Certainly, I guess primary school children, it's very much on their curriculum. So it's very much part of what they want to do. We actually loitered outside of the community colleges at the time when community college children, young people, came out of the school. And we were shocked, actually, and horrified by their lack of knowledge and their lack of understanding and the lack of teaching that was taking place in schools around the issue of climate, to be honest. I did have a dream, by the way, of doing a BRIC talk once, but but my partners didn't take me up on that. I think they thought I was mad at that point. But anyway, that's beside the point. We are in BRIC Phase 2 for Plymouth City Council. We are working with 2 community colleges. So I guess our next dream is really to say to them, how can we work with you? What would you like to do? And then how can they then pass that message on? Because they're the experts in it, because they understand the culture that they're living in. It's kind of a bit beyond me at my age, but I'm willing to learn from them. And I think that's what we all need to take on board, is we should be willing to learn from them.
I'm conscious of the time, but I want to give all the panel a chance to respond to this and then quite quickly get some more questions in if we've got them. Hannah, we saw your wonderful video showing the community there in Chew Magna, wasn't it, getting involved and building resilience in their community. But I have to say, they were all of a certain age. So how much engagement do you have with younger people, and how are you making the issue of building resilient communities more exciting for younger people?
Yeah, it's a good point. I nearly said it myself at the end. It's absolutely right. We do typically find that a lot of the volunteers who have the time, they are retired. They've got more time. They might not necessarily have so many financial worries and things like that. So one of the things and this isn't necessarily about making it more exciting, but one of the things we do when we talk about volunteer engagement and how community members can get others on board, we sort of say, well, actually, even if you've got some people in the community who might say, I haven't got the time to come out and engage with this, there might be other ways they can contribute. So actually, for that generation, what they might really benefit from is someone who could say, actually, do you know what, I can come on set a Facebook page up for you. And that's a way that communities engage a lot through Facebook, community Facebook pages, or it might be Twitter, or it might be TikTok. I don't know much about TikTok myself. But, you could get someone who's got a different set of skills to come in and help. Or it might be about fundraising or, other skill sets that people could bring that isn't just about your typical view of someone getting their welly boots on in bad weather and getting out and helping the community. So I think I'd make that point. And then otherwise, just in terms of our broader work at Groundwork, I think one of the things we try and do is just encourage people to think about their future. It's not just about what's happening now. And as a teenager, you might think this isn't relevant to me, but actually this is about what's going to happen as you're an adult, thinking about your own children in the future. And, that's not necessarily something that will grab everyone, but I think that kind of messaging can help get people kind of more engaged on these issues.
And Dusty, briefly, we assume that the TikTok generation, as we've started calling them now, is fully engaged in climate change, but Lisa's experience was that perhaps not so much as we might have thought. How do we get them engaged, and how do we make it more exciting for them so that they become engaged?
I'm a bit left field on this one because I've got a 28-year-old son who's really, really interested in climate change and climate change adaptation, but it's not a priority. If you have a conversation with him, it's pretty good. If I may, when it was first muted, the question, it made me laugh because I think I said in my talk, I used to be a theatre performer, so I always think of theatre, and every time there's a drought, it's good for green roofs. Every time there's a flood, it's good for green roofs. Unfortunately, as I think it is Ghislaine said, when the tragedy happens. But there's this fantastic video that I just tried to Google. Obviously, there's been more floods in Vienna, but it used to be the #1 video, and I think this is how you get young people involved. It's a video of a road in Vienna with all these young people sitting there, and then they get washed down the street because the flood is so bad. And it's quite an amusing video, but I would say theatre is how you get young people involved. Make it dramatic, and they might get worried.
Thank you. Yes, there's a question at the back there, and then we'll try and squeeze in another one if we've got one in the room.
It's actually less of a question and more than an observation on something that you've just said. Yeah. We tried using a variety of different kind of humour scenarios in Scotland, and we ended up sponsoring a fully immersive theatre experience, which then toured the country, which was very, very popular. It got the message across. But I've got to give credit to my cousins in the Environment Agency. They've worked with a couple of companies and Microsoft to produce a Minecraft game called Rivercraft, which is all about engaging that very generation, and it's based on a flooding scenario in Preston. So I would look up Preston, Rivercraft, Minecraft, and Google that.
There you go. Yeah. In the room, they're saying that that's still primary school age rather than teenagers dealing with that. But video games may be one way through to younger people. Great contribution. Thank you for that. We'll wrap up now, if I may, the question and answer sessions. We've got 2 more speakers to hear from, but I just wanted to put a point that came in via YouTube earlier on from Jenny South. And this is one perhaps for you, Lisa. Now, I should point out for all the delegates here and those joining us online that Lisa isn't an elected council official. Lisa is a council employee, works as an officer, is not a council elected representative, as it were, so not influencing policy. But the question is about policy, and the question is all the work done on the BRIC projects and all the other projects we've heard today, how much will that influence local councils' decisions in the future? Will recommendations be made, or will new policy be made? Lisa, in your interactions with councillors, how much of the work of BRIC are they taking on board, and how much is it influencing future policy?
I do think it's actually influencing policy enormously. We've had not just the BRIC project in Plymouth, we've also had Green Mines in Plymouth. We have community forest going on. We've had preventing plastic pollution. Lots of different projects all around nature-based solutions and encouraging greening and numerous other options, obviously, for us, SUDs, rain gardens, etc. I go on and on and on. And I think that, yes, they've sat up, they've listened. Events like this will help to influence as well. So, yeah, the answer is yes, we do. We absolutely do inform policy because they learn from us. They take our ideas, they learn from us. We've gone out into the community to work with the community, to hear the community. So I really hope that that's something they can take away from this, is the community voice that we've given them.
Would you thank our panellists and speakers in this section? Thanks to Ghislaine and to Samuel in France. Thanks to Lisa. Thanks to Dusty and to Hannah here in the UK. Thank you very much, all of you. We're coming to the end of our conference, but at this point, of course, we need to look to the future. I think it was a question asked earlier on in the morning sessions about what happens to all the knowledge that's been accumulated over the last 2 years as part of BRIC and all the knowledge we've shared here today. Is this just going to stop, and will there be a legacy, or will it carry on? So we're going to look now beyond BRIC and see what the future might hold. And joining us first of all to discuss this is Plymouth City Council's Head of Business Improvement. Would you please welcome to the stage Andy Sharp.
Okay, thank you for having me. So yeah, that is my job title, but the reason that I'm invited here is an interim role where I'm temporarily responsible for environmental operations. So a team of about 200 people across multiple teams, mainly frontline staff, delivering street cleansing, waste collection, grounds maintenance and arboriculture services. So although not directly involved in the delivery of the BRIC project in Plymouth, we work really closely with the teams who've been delivering it across some of the examples that Lisa gave, and this project and others. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak. In terms of climate resilience, it's also got just a really big impact on our services. So we're looking at changes to the growing season, which affects obviously grass cutting. Weeds used to be a seasonal issue. It's now all year round. We have to keep on top of them. Leaf fall, we sweep up. We've got mechanised sweepers. That's all year round. And things like watercourse management and flooding do affect us. We'll come on to that a little bit later. But in terms of BRIC, obviously, I think we've said it's about bringing flood awareness to a wider audience, making links between nature-based solutions to manage flooding. I'm going to talk a little bit about new forms of sustainable finance models that we'll be looking at. But I think really it comes down to sort of people, finance and infrastructure. So. Yeah. Okay, so this is really just what I'm going to run through. So very brief look at what the project's done and what it's yet to do. Go into phase 2 of BRIC, so the second BRIC. We'll be looking at water and waste management opportunities, and then the I don't know if it's pronounced NEUF, but it's a Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund. So that's one of our mechanisms we'll be using to fund some of these solutions in the future, but probably pretty low in the all-time list of good acronyms. So I think we need to. We've got some good ones. We've got BRIC, and we'll come on to DRIP in a minute, but that's not so great. And SUDS, which I think you probably know a lot more than I do about. So we'll talk about that. So just a reminder, I don't know how well you know Plymouth, some of you know it really well, some of you probably don't, but we're surrounded on 3 sides by water, so obviously water management and the impact on the city is quite significant, so it just puts that into perspective. I think we're top right, about 1 o'clock on the map if you're trying to find the hotel. So this is just a little bit about some of the achievements that we've had, so Lisa's sort of gone into this, but very much working with communities, not sort of coming to them and with a particular sort of mandate, but listening to them. We've supported the creation of 2 new flood action groups in Western Mill Village and the St Leven area of the city. We've delivered a successful and extensive community engagement programme, and that included newsletters to over 11,000 homes. We've done public consultations, and we've delivered home and dry workshops to raise awareness and educate about the risks of flooding. But there's obviously still work to be done. There's two of our areas, St Leven and Trefusis Park, so areas we're responsible for maintenance, and this was a few years ago, I understand. So you can see sort of the kind of thing we're dealing with, and talking about creating a sense of urgency. It's hard to imagine much more than that, really. So on to phase 2, BRIC phase 2. So we've been awarded 2 years of funding from the Devon Resilience Innovation Project, so that's the STRIP, and you can see it's an established partnership with a range of partners across local authorities and other agencies. Basically, two years has not been enough time for PCC to fully integrate itself into our communities, so this is the opportunity to build on that progress and create this flood resilience network and look at sort of further opportunities. So during phase 2, we'll use the appreciative inquiry process to work with communities most at risk from flooding and basically look at how we engage with them and how we look to change behaviour. So I know Lisa went into this earlier, but just as a slight aside, we've used that model with our staff. So we've used the appreciative inquiry, and you can imagine with a frontline workforce, maybe we've had some people who've worked there for a very long time, got set ways of thinking about what they do and maybe what we do as in management, and it's been a really, it's broken down barriers and getting people to think creatively and positively about solutions rather than sort of coming to them with, right, there might be more use maybe to more directive management styles in the past and actually asking for their opinions and their ideas, and it really works. It's really interesting to see how that's been used with communities as well, but it works very well with our staff. So we're going to be delivering a citywide Slow the Flow campaign. We're working with schools on various programs. And we're going to develop the Plymouth Flood Resilience Network. We've got various action groups. I think there's discussion about setting up, sort of using various social networks. So who knows, BRIC may take off. You need to patent that, Lisa, before it gets taken away by someone else. And we're looking at installing and monitoring flood alert systems. Okay, so just a little bit about how we've been working with South West Water in terms of wastewater management. Obviously, the slide previously and this one reinforces that ring of water around the city. So BRIC has really created a new approach to how we engage with communities. We've been able to sort of get out better information and sustain that engagement over the period of time. So we're looking to build on that further, and also build on the relationship with South West Water as well, who are one of our key partners. Much of this will be around looking for nature-based solutions to the challenges ahead, and looking at sustainable urban drainage and introducing more water butts in the city. So yeah. But one of the ways to do this is to look at new and innovative finance models in relation to funding. So this is that acronym. So in terms of kind of what we're looking to do, we have been successful in receiving funding from the NERF, and we're working with Finance Earth to find new ways of approaching this finance model. So the partnership includes Finance Earth, South West Water, and other parts of the council. We'll be identifying suitable SUDS interventions. So that's again where it sort of passes into my world. So there's a really interesting project going on in Central Park. We're looking at like whole-scale water management and quite elaborate SUDS measures. Also across the city where we've had public realm projects, we've incorporated SUDS into that. So our Mill Bay project, if anyone has been down that side of the city, you wouldn't know it's SUDS, but it works really well, and our team maintain it, and it's quite creative, and also looking at where you can maybe sometimes have like play features incorporated into that. The plans for the city centre, so the public realm changes that are happening across the board, that includes quite elaborate SUDS measures to manage water levels, both currently and obviously what's predicted in terms of rainfall. So this gives us the ability to access new funding mechanisms. And there's talk here about environmental impact bonds, payment services and municipal bonds. So just looking creatively. And then also as part of the project, we'll be sharing our learning. So this is one of the projects at Central Park. You obviously can't see the detail, but you can probably see there's a lot of variations in the detail. So you see there's lots of elements to those SUDS schemes. Yeah, I think really it's just what we're saying about working with stakeholders, trying to find the right solution, and we'll listen to communities, and if they've got ideas they want to incorporate into that, then the opportunities are there to listen and engage. So in conclusion, we'll continue to sustain our engagement with the people of Plymouth. We'll look at the innovative funding models available to us to finance these nature-based solutions. We'll explore creative interventions to support flood management and reduce flood risks. And we'll aim to get positive results for the people of Plymouth to create a truly resilient city. So that's That's it. Thank you for having me. Cheers.
So that's a UK perspective on life beyond BRIC. Let's get a French perspective now on the future and life beyond BRIC. And would you please welcome to our conference now this afternoon the Director of Cerema, I should say, Sébastien Dupré.
Hi. Future job, which is the Managing Director of Cerema, but I'm only the Director for Risk, Waters and Maritime Issues. That's the next step. One day, maybe. Well, I'm very honored to be with you today. Lord Mayor, please, thank you for hosting this event. I want to say a few words, and I try not to be too long, because this is my main default, you know. But I'm very glad that we are all together here. We all met in Rouen, for some of you, and that was really a nice event, and I'm very happy that we can conclude BRIC here with you. And it makes a lot of sense for Cerema to be here, because we are a public agency, a sort of public center of expertise and knowledge, and we are opening to local communities or local authorities who are entering right now in our governance and in our model. So we are like a national organization, a bit like the EA somehow for some aspects, but with local authorities in our governance and in our business model. So it makes a lot of sense that we're here today. When I'm preparing a few words, I thought, well, where were we on the 31st January 2021 when this project started, and what has changed since, at least on the French side, so that we can see why BRIC was very important, because many other things happened around BRIC. Although at the moment we are talking about drought a lot at the moment in France, the lack of water and the sort of national plans being set up for that. But you know, climate resilience is not only flood, it's also drought, and we have to really combine these two issues to have action that makes sense. So what have we done very recently? We've been talking about finance, and I love that, because in a French meeting you would talk about finance and you would talk about regulation, law, standards. You know, so I need to talk about finance. A French fund, which is called the Green Fund, has been installed in January to fund by subvention all projects that contribute to ecological transition, including flooding, including reinstalling nature, and also a system, an innovative system of very low rate, what's the word exactly for that? Loan for local communities has been set up. I mean, if your project is very interesting, you can have a very interesting loan at a very low rate. That's one thing. It's like 2 billion euro for 2023 and 2024. The other thing that was set up and announced by the government is what we call the 4-degree program. Well, some of the authorities thought, well, if we want to increase resilience, maybe the 1.5 or the 2-degree scenarios might be a bit low. So let's imagine what would be France with a 4-degree scenario, and try to finally test what we are doing facing maybe a 4-degree scenario. And that's very interesting. We'll be very active in that within Cerema. But it's challenging, in fact, what we are thinking now, and facing maybe a reality that might come. And maybe last thing, and this was yesterday evening, and that's why I was not with you yesterday, is the new National Committee for Coast was installed by the Minister and by a Member of Parliament. And we've talked about financing, new way of financing resilience of coastlines, as well as increasing awareness of erosion, coastal flood, sea level rise, and maintaining the communities where they are on the French coastlines. And it's interesting because we've been talking about not only flood but other things, and that was one member of our government talking about that yesterday. So at least that's what happened very recently in France. So I think there's a general willingness to accelerate all that. But I must say, at least in France, when you look at the numbers, that there's still a big effort to do, and that makes a lot of sense to the contribution that was made by BRIC. I don't want to put too many figures, but we have like 20 million people living in flood-prone areas in France, like 2 million on the coastline, and the rest along rivers, and 9 million of jobs which are exposed to flood. And the public policies on flooding are quite old in France. The much older dates back from 1804, where people were allowed to build dikes on their own ground, basically. And a lot of things happened since, but the first law that talked about information of population dates from 2003. You see, 200 years. And it took 3 years to be implemented because people disagree, basically, on the fact that you need to inform people. So I think it's quite an interesting thing. There were many laws on, prevention and funds, etc. But, it's very, very striking. On the last point, I'm not going to dwell on what Ghislaine said, is this action in 2021 that reinforced the action of AFPCNT, but 20 years nearly between these two events. And when you look at this action, at the end of the day, all this money on all this regulation make that only 25 people who are exposed to flood, national numbers in France, considered they are informed and know what they have to do. A lot of money, a lot of regulation, and it doesn't work so well, if I may say. So I think that makes clear that other actions are required, other actions than putting more money. Probably we need some more money, but we haven't discussed that yet. And that basically regulations are not the way. So again, I think the contribution of BRIC into thinking action through communities is really essential, and it will be a very important contribution. So if we want to go further to be, yeah, I'm on time, I think, yeah. If we want to be a bit operational, I want to say maybe two things. First, what we are going to do within Cerema, with the achievement of BRIC, several things. First of all, we're going to do little publications to make this information available, and I'm very glad that this little document is available in French and in English, thanks to the support of some people I see around this table. So you can find this little document, which is basically making people aware and making decision maker aware that there's something to do with risk culture and make people at the heart of the action. So go online on our website, you'll find it, and it's exactly the same document, French and English. So that's the first achievement. The second achievement is basically we are going to continue the work on virtual reality, which is presented, I think, around there. We want to make some progress on that, make it fully operational, and we are already discussing with the city of Compiègne, where we are based, where I am based, and where I come from, to take this tool to make the local resident of the new area around the train station that is going to be completely revamped, but which is exposed to flood, what it can be after it has been rebuilt, but when it will be exposed to flood, how the area can be felt and can be understood. Third action, we're going to work with EPAGA, and I'm very pleased that the president of EPAGA is here and is elected mayor. We're going to develop some work with this partner. And finally, within Cerema, we will probably finally use the work that you have developed to evaluate preparedness and try if we can push it to evaluate resilience. If we want to evaluate public policies, we have to tool just to measure the temperature. What we've done, has it been efficient or useful? We need a way to measure this. And if we want to have a broader view, and because I think this very nice collaboration could probably, maybe, develop some further collaboration. There are probably three things I retain. First, and I think that has been said many times, is that we should work on resilience with not only a scope which is flooding, as maybe it was thought at the beginning of the project, and it proved to be a scale which was a bit narrow, and we need to think much broader. Coast, for instance, on coastal flooding, as I said at the beginning, but also maybe connection with nature, as it was said. The question we were asking ourselves when preparing my words is we should expand this work on resilience facing climate, but how far, basically? Where should we stop so that it still makes sense? So I think there's probably interesting question around that, and also how do we make it efficient? Because at the end of the day, we need to be efficient, and all the effort should bring some results. So that's maybe the first sort of area. This second area is probably something that was very striking for a Frenchman, is all the things you've been discussing on flood action group. I mean, that's something very specific. There's probably something very cultural also, I think, in what was shown, and that's very interesting because we don't have so much of that in France, and I think there's something really to probably work more because the association of flood group action, but also some action have proved to be very interesting. And I think there's something very innovative, at least from when seen from our side of the channel. So how can we make that work maybe more efficiently? What are the tools you need and that we could use also to develop this flood action group that we are not very familiar with in France? And finally, last but not least, I still have 20 minutes, I think, yeah. Innovation. I mean, that was the aim of the project. I mean, we will have some innovation, but there's probably some other routes to investigate. I mean, clearly, the new tech thing you mentioned for the TikTok generation, some of the projects presented by OGOX, the 3D vision, there's probably something around new tech that needs to be developed. I'm 100% convinced that there's something around innovating funding of all that, starting with how much we need. And I'm not going to open this debate, but we have at the moment a debate at the Parliament of the implication of who is paying what when we are talking about resilience instead of talking about reducing vulnerability. So, I mean, that's maybe for dinner. But there's probably something around funding. And finally, of course, around social innovation. And social innovation is very much linked to, well, what is the social group? So that's probably something very localized, and I think BRIC should spread to collate some other social innovation. So I'm nearly to the end. I would like to make you think back again to 2021. Remember that in between there was like COVID. Okay, only maybe 2 years of project, and you've achieved all that, all of you. So I think that's really a tremendous achievement. I've put it in my notes, proposed a round of applause for all that work. So I propose maybe we will just do that for you. And now I think I should really come to the conclusion and say a few words of thank you. So I'd like to thank really the 4 speakers. Maybe they're gone, but I'd like to sincerely thank them. Thank all the attendees in here, but also the attendees who were online. I mean, a great organization to do all this. And of course, I want to thank all the partners. I wanted to give a long list of names, but I'm not going to do that because I'm sure I'm going to miss some of them, but I really want to thank Plymouth City Council, and I would say one word, which is the name of Lisa, because she has been a tremendous, project leader and project manager. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all the people involved in this organization, in OGOX, in the National Flood Forum, in Thames 21, in Dorset Coast Forum, and also the French partners, the Agence d'Urbanisme Oise-les-Vallées, le CPIE Val d'Authie, the Cerema team, I should say, probably with a special thank to Céline, yes. And also all the partners locally who were involved, and probably we don't see the logo on there. I mean, I think you wouldn't have done such a nice work without them, and I'd like to thank one who is here, who was one of our local partners, Espaga. I know the EA was supportive of the project, and I'd like to thank EA on your behalf because they've been very supportive of that. And of course, our financial sponsor, which is the European Union, should be thanked. I think there's no representative of the EU here, but at least I think we should really do that. I'd like to thank you for all this steering and moderating. The tech team, there's nothing without the tech, so thank you, PL Event, and also the translators, Pascal and Jonathan. I think you did a great job, thank you. So if you may, I think that was the sort of final official talk, so I'd like maybe you all join here, and we make a very nice group photo, and then you have your last word. If you agree. Okay? So come on, let's make a picture. With Lord Mayor in the center, of course. Yeah, I think. Sorry, you're going to take some delay, but you know, it's the end of the day.
How many did we have our eyes shut for?
I won't delay you any more, and Sebastian did a wonderful job in bringing things pretty much to a conclusion. I just wanted to say that observing and listening today, several themes emerged, and I think one of the themes that came through very strongly is listening. And I think it came through from many of the talks today that to get the best action from a community is to show, first of all, that you're listening to that community and letting them lead a lot of the discussion and a lot of the future plans. And that seems to be the key to success, and that seems to have been how BRIC, certainly here in Plymouth and in other projects around the country and in France as well, have succeeded in engaging the community at a time when there are so many other priorities for so many people. As has been mentioned, COVID took a great deal of time away from what you might have been able to achieve had COVID not been around in the last couple of years. But also now, of course, a cost of living crisis where many people, many communities' focus will be on how to keep their homes warm and to provide food for their families. So maybe resilience and flooding isn't something that's top of their agenda. So engaging with communities will be an ongoing challenge, but it sounds as if BRIC has laid down some very, very positive foundations, and hopefully there will be many great legacies to come from the work that we have all been hearing about here today. It also strikes me that getting through to communities and engaging with them comes from entertainment. We heard a lot today about some of the art projects, theatre, music, festivals, walks, games, technology, TikTok, some of the technology we've heard on display here today, and all sorts of other activities which have gone right across the generations. And that seems to be a key to getting communities involved in thinking about climate resilience. We've heard also about the challenges of maintaining that, and that sounds like it will be an ongoing challenge, but the work is obviously vital. I think Sebastian was talking a moment ago about coastal erosion, and those here in the UK particularly will be aware that only in the last week or so we've had pictures online, on social media and in the news of homes having to be pulled down on the coast of the UK because the coastline has disappeared, and those homes are at risk of falling into the sea. People have been forced to leave those homes and they've been pulled down. So they've lost their homes, their possessions, their way of life, because of coastal erosion. So it's not just flooding, it is all sorts of risks that we need to build resilience towards. I hope you found the conference so far interesting. I know the various discussions will continue. I'm sure there'll be lots of discussions over dinner and over the next couple of days. Lots of stands and displays to continue to look at, and lots of opportunities to share knowledge, information and experience. Thank you for your participation today and over the last couple of years. For those who will be travelling, have a safe journey home, and in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your time in Plymouth, and thank you for taking part in the conference.